Coming up today on Hobbies, Crafts, and Collectibles, Cindy Rich from Ashmore is here to share her collection and her connection to the days when mail was delivered by train. Stay tuned for more next on Hobbies, Crafts, and Collectibles. It's a pleasure to welcome Cindy Rich from Ashmore, Illinois to our studio today. Cindy, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Cindy has an amazing collection with a family connection. Actually, Cindy collects memorabilia from the United Postal Service when they used to have the postal clerks that ran the railway, right?
Right.
This is fascinating to me, and I love that you collect something so near and dear to your heart because, let me see, your father and your grandfather both
That's right.
worked.
That's right. I actually grew up in a town of 200 down in southern Illinois, Du Bois, Illinois.
Sure.
And in our tiny little town, there were at least a dozen railway postal clerks, which is sort of unusual. And that, but
Why in Du Bois? Is it the location?
you know, not really,
Okay.
because we're just in the middle of nowhere, but in Washington County down there. But it was just one of those jobs I think a lot of people weren't even aware of. And in a small town like that, when one person was doing it, they talked to others, and more of them realized it was a good occupation.
I see.
My dad often told the story when he turned 18 and graduated high school, he had two choices, coal mines or the post office. And so he chose the railway mail service, and it was a good choice. It was a
Yes.
very good choice. And my grandfather had done it for years, and he became a foreman. And so Dad and Papa worked together until my grandpa retired, and then eventually the railway mail service was discontinued as the interstate system evolved.
Sure. So now what used to be done on the railways is actually being done through trucks.
With trucks and airplanes and things like that. So so they discontinued the use of the railway mail service, and it's a fascinating topic because there aren't a whole lot of gentlemen around that worked on the mail trains. And so this all, you know, even though it was work related with what I do with teaching with primary sources on campus, it had a very personal connection and turned into a labor of love, and now I can't seem to get enough of these things.
Sure. Well, you are a wealth of information about the topic. In fact, I know WEIU did a documentary film with you a couple years back.
They did.
And you can actually still find that footage on WEIU's website. So if you want to get some of the backstory for that and see some personal interviews of some of the men who actually worked as postal clerks on the railway system, then that's a good place to go.
And it was really interesting because we thought this was just a local interest piece, and it was actually picked up and aired nationwide and also in Canada and Mexico. So there are a lot of people that are interested in this topic.
Absolutely. Now the name of that documentary is Constant Motion. So if you do a Google search for that in WEIU, you'll come up with it, but it is on the website. But what I love is now I get to see all the things. This is what I love is the collection involved with that, the memorabilia, which you have a lot of. So let's take a look at some of it. First of all, was there any special set of skills that someone had to have to work on the railway?
That is one of the interesting things about this job, because these gentlemen would work so many days on, so many days off. And that because they were on a moving train going from one, like maybe Memphis to Chicago, back to Memphis, back to Chicago. And so it'd be, you know, these long...
These are long routes.
Long routes they were covering, picking up mail the whole time and delivering mail the entire time. So even though, you know, they would go through with the big hook and grab the mail, it had to be brought into the train and then sorted. And so what they did was not only work on the train, on, you know, their feet doing this, but these guys had to be smart because they had to memorize all of these towns because there were no zip codes at this time.
Sure.
So you had to memorize which town came next, the order, and all of
There
that.
were a lot of little towns.
A lot of little towns. And so, and you know, in the 60s, 50s, and earlier, the railroad was a major component of communities. And so a lot of towns were right on the railroad line, and that's where they dropped the mail. Now we're all spread farther away from the railroad because of the interstates again. But at that time there were many, many stops they made. And so one of the things we have is this right here.
Yeah, I love this case.
And
this is so neat.
and each of the clerks would have usually two cases.
Okay.
One was their overnight case that they took with them on the train.
That would be like,
Right, that there were actual suitcases, and they would take these with them on their trips. The other was a practice case. And this is an example of a practice case because before you could get this job, you had to pass a test that you could do within like 3 minutes, sort 100 pieces of mail. And so at their homes, and I don't remember my dad doing this. My mom talks about it, that he had it set up in our basement when I was little, but I just don't have any memory of that. But
is this part of the practice card set that
it
you have?
is, right, that the clerks would buy these little card sets, and it would have a list, and each one would be a town on their route or a small town off, but it went to that town. So say Charleston didn't have a railroad, Mattoon did, so Charleston would get dropped off in Mattoon. So they would practice at home with these cases.
I see.
Having the little signs they would put little cards like this with the towns or cities or whatever on it, and then they would practice at home doing that so they could pass these tests to get these routes.
Wow.
So they had homework. It wasn't just that they went
did.
to work and came home. It was actually a very involved process. They also had the scheme books, which is what some of these are.
Yeah, these are so fascinating to look at.
And when you go through those, it shows all of the different routes and what stops were where, and that in Mattoon, mail would go to Charleston, Ashmore, and all of these other small towns.
Oh, wow, look at that.
And sometimes they had to be updated.
Right, a little white out.
Right.
And, I see. So they were constantly relearning routes as well.
Yes.
It wasn't just like a one-time you memorize it
No.
and then go. Well, I would be discounted for this job right off the bat because I get motion sickness.
Exactly.
I mean, I can't ride backward in the car. I can't read in the car.
Right.
And, so they really did have to have a physical. It was probably very physically demanding.
It was physically and mentally. And they often talked too about the weather because as they were going, they would get to communities where they would have to reach out with the metal arm, catch the mail, bring that mail in, and then throw out mail for that community. So that was also physically demanding.
Absolutely.
And if it's snowing and there's snow blowing in your face as you're in a train moving, you know, that was something you had to deal with as well. So that's why we picked the constant motion name, because physically and mentally, they were always busy doing something.
They were the original multitaskers, weren't they?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Wow. And so then when they're on the route, they pull the mail in and they're sorting mail and such. I know you have some tools of the trade here. First of all, the locks. Now, those would have to be locked up in between.
Right.
So how would that work when you're in constant motion? How do you, these locks are so cool. I just love the feel of it.
They're heavy.
Yes.
They're the heavy old locks.
They really are. This one's
But
brass.
there was a need for security and actually railway clerks carried guns. They were armed and had badges because they had to protect, because a lot of financial transactions were carried out in the mail. So they would have large amounts of cash and payroll that they were taking to different places. So things had to be locked up. So they would put these locks on the bags. When they put the bag full of mail or tossed the bag full of mail out, it would be locked. So somebody couldn't just come along and just pick it up and pick and choose whose mail they wanted out of that bag.
Sure, understood.
And so, but security was very important on the mail trains.
You're right. And so now then they'd have to sort through the mail, and you've got some interesting. I love these. What do you call these? Finger
Finger knives.
knife. Okay, put that on. How
And
would you have wear?
All right, you would just slide it on, and then they would cut twine. And as they're bagging and bundling, then they would just very quickly
Cut the twine.
and cut it. And I remember seeing these growing up as a child and not having a clue what they were.
They look like kind of like somebody would use today for some of the art they have out there, the steampunking and stuff. That looks like a claw that you could.
Maybe I could take it home. There's probably things I could use that for today. You know?
There you go. Your Christmas gift wrapping.
Yeah. And then they also had stamps that they would stamp. You know, every time they stopped at a post office, they would have to stop and use it there and mark where they were on the date, and as well as any transactions that happened, because it was all followed very closely with trip records and things like that, like the trip record that we have right there.
Yeah, and I love that you have the old the receipts of of registered mail, and you've got the stamps and even the ink pads. This is all tools of the trade that they would have used. What a neat collection to have.
So, and actually the folder up front is some of my grandfather's credentials.
Oh, wonderful.
And that we have.
Look at that.
So it very much is a personal collection.
It is.
And something that I care deeply about.
And it's something that now, that my radar is out there, I'll know if I see something to try to snatch it up for you.
Thank you.
One of my favorite pieces of memorabilia that Cindy has is this great form. I know you were originally not looking specifically for this form for the reason that I think it's cool, but what was this form? How is it important to you?
This is actually one of the trip reports that my grandfather was a foreman on that trip, and I was looking for a trip report that had both my had Papa and my dad listed on it, and so I found it. I was so excited to find that, and then as I started looking more closely at the document, I looked at the date, and I was actually born a few weeks early, and so my dad was at work. Well, this was the night that I was born, and that they had to stop the train. They stopped the train and got my dad off the train to bring him to the hospital to meet me since I was already here.
As they should have.
Absolutely.
Great. I love that. What a precious piece to have. And so which one's your dad then? You had
C.E. Waldman is my grandfather, Clarence Waldman. And W.C. Waldman is my dad, Wallace Clarence.
I see.
Waldman.
Well, you have a couple pictures now. I think it's neat. There's a railway museum. Now, where is that located?
There is the Illinois Railway Museum is located in Union, Illinois. So it's way up in Northwest Illinois.
Okay.
But they actually have an RPO days every year in June. And railway clerks come from different locations, and the train moves. And they let them make one more catch.
Okay, so this is the inside of they've got it working, postal car.
Right, they've actually set it up so it looks like the other, and you can see the cases here that show how they use the practice cases and how that all fit together.
And this is your dad in the forefront here. So this shows him, we'll do the front and back here.
Making the catch.
This is him in the doorway of the train, making the catch.
Yeah, and he was successful because if you dropped it or if the bag went under the train and it cut it open and the mail went flying, you received demerits. And he hadn't, done that since the 60s.
Yeah,
and he was successful. And they let me make a catch, and I was not successful.
It wasn't a like daughter, like father, like daughter situation.
No, I dropped that bag.
Oh, that's great. Well, you can just tell too. It just looks like these men are enjoying reliving.
When they get together, the stories they tell, and they were witnessing the changes in our communities. Because as they were going through these communities, they were seeing them grow and new communities develop. And then when the interstate was built, they saw those changes and felt the effects of it when this was no longer needed because it was all done by highway.
Sure.
So they're great resources just to learn about the history of our state and our country as those changes occurred.
Now we have a couple of reprints that you were able to make for us so that we could have some visuals in the backdrop. I wanted to explain, especially this map right here of Illinois. Now, what does that show?
That
I'm
is.
going to let the camera zoom in on it
Okay.
for us.
That's a. Okay, that is a Galbraith map, and it was created in 1897, I believe.
Oh, okay.
And Mr. Galbraith created a collection of those maps. But what it has drawings, and actually one of the things that's kind of fun of working with these in schools, the first thing people look for are interstates, which are not there. And
That's
so
true.
that's kind of fun. But a lot of students are shocked how many railroad lines crossed Illinois in the past that aren't there anymore. Now there are a lot of bike trails and things like that. But at one time, people took the train practically everywhere. And so these maps show that, but it's really neat. They drew little pictures.
Yeah, for to represent the town.
Right.
And what's fascinating about the map is when it gets to the area of Coles County, I was talking about the little towns that they had to kind of keep track of. There's a little town like very close to Charleston that I'd never heard of before, McPherson.
Right. I think it's McPherson, but I'm not sure. And we actually had a neighbor who was an elderly woman, and she knew all about our community.
Yeah.
And so I asked her one day, I'm like, what is this? And it used to be a little town along the railroad where they would take cattle for the slaughterhouse. that was then taken over to East St. Louis.
Okay.
And that town no longer exists. That's where the racetrack is now.
I see.
And that, but yeah, so there's all these things you learn about our history and our communities in that. But the pictures are a hoot to look at on the map.
Well, I bet you have heard a lot of stories. Do any stand out as far as any that your dad or your grandpa may have told about their time on the railway?
One of my favorites, my dad was telling a story about when the crew before left a snake in one of the bags. And they reached in and found it, and it was quite startling for them.
Well, that's just mean.
Yeah, exactly. And several of the guys, though, told stories when they talked to us about crashes or near crashes and things like that. And there were a lot of accidents that they were involved in that they've told us about, too. So, you know, in addition to doing your job, things like that would happen.
Absolutely.
And so it was, but man, it was a real brotherhood of these guys because they spent so much time in close quarters.
Absolutely.
Shoulder to shoulder, you know, doing this job. And so they're all very proud of what they did and very, very close to one another.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's a special group of guys. It really is.
It is. Now, do you have a special for those collectors out there who have, especially family memorabilia? Do you have any suggestions as far as how to care for or display or store any of your collectibles?
Actually, you know, of course we have the collectibles that are the original items, and that's, you know, important to take care of with acid-free paper and anything like that that you're going to do, or protecting them behind glass. But even more so, scanning and taking photographs of these things and creating either books, because you can do that so easily now electronically, and telling the stories about jobs from past generations and different things like that that you can do. And so digitizing these things that can be kept forever for future generations, and share your stories. Too many people think, oh, a lot of these guys have told me, oh, we talked about that when my kids were little. They don't care about this stuff. They do. We do. We want to hear the stories. We want to know about it, and our children want to know. So please, please share your stories.
Sure, and even if children don't understand the value of some of these stories when they've heard them when they're little, what ends up happening as they grow older, they're going to wish they heard those stories, you know, and so, and that's the oral tradition, and that's been since the beginning of man that we passed down that kind of history.
And now that we have these digital capabilities,
absolutely,
it's even easier to do.
Yeah, and what a beautiful gift that would be for the holidays or for a special occasion for that person that has everything. Take some of your family history, put it down, scan in the photos, and even
you can add text.
I love things with handwriting. You know, the old forms and the old receipts or just any letters, things like that. If you can scan those in and digitize them and then spread out the love and hand it out, because you only have one of those, but boy, wouldn't it be nice to have the family enjoy it as a family. So very cool. Was there anything else about the history of the Railway Postal Service that you would like for us to know before we close?
You know, if you get a chance to get to the depot in Mattoon, it's beautiful. Check that out. Or if you ever have a chance to go to the Illinois Railway Museum, they do amazing things. I mean, not just RPO, but everything. They even have a Thomas weekend. And that, so yeah, they do great things, and it's an amazing place. And so, you know, if you're just passing by and you see railway museums and that a sign, take the effort and stop by. You'll be surprised what you'll find that you can relate to.
Absolutely. Great information. What a great field trip, too, for some kids to take. I know I would have loved that as a kid. That would be awesome. Well, thank you, Cindy Rich, so much for being with us and for sharing all of your precious memorabilia with us.
Thanks.
This week on Show and Tell, I'm enlisting the help of my father again. Dad, thanks for helping us out.
You're welcome.
One of my hobbies growing up was music. I was forced to play the piano, and I'm so glad. I love playing the piano. I use it every day of my life. I love the gift of music, so thanks for making me practice. But through the years, I played on a lot of different pianos, and what I noticed a trend in, you know, some of these older pianos, because people were going to the electronic pianos, some of the older beautiful ones just aren't being kept up. And sometimes they have the most beautiful woodwork on them. So what I wanted to find out was, well, what can you do with an old piano and with all of its parts. And my dad has really gotten this down to a science. He uses every little bit of the piano to make something new and beautiful out of them. And so we're just going to show you a few ideas that he's right now working on a piano. And he tells me he can probably get like 8 to 10 projects out of this one piano, because there's some really beautiful wood
Absolutely.
in a piano. What's great, those old pianos were made, they used large ornate pieces of wood.
That's
Some of
right.
them are hand carved, some of them are like burl walnut, and just some beautiful things. So what inspires you about when you see a fresh piano? You know, what gets your juices going?
Mainly just the pieces of wood. Just
Yeah.
Everyone's different, and I know that pianos are built very stable. So if it's a veneer, and almost all pianos are veneer.
Mm-hmm.
People say, well, I've got a solid oak or I've got solid walnut. No, they don't. They have a piano that's veneered, and it's usually veneered on a wood such as poplar. And poplar's a wonderful wood to work with. It's stable, doesn't warp, and it works real easy. So I'm interested in any piece of wood off of a piano.
Okay, well, this would have been like where you'd set the music, right? Like
Yes.
You see these.
Yes, the center panel of this one, hinged out, had a shelf on it. That's where the songbooks would have been put. And all I've done, I've taken a piece off of someplace else in the piano, ripped it down, took the ledge off, and stabilized this so it's just one solid piece.
Gotcha. And you're going to actually he's going to actually lay this on its back and overlay it with a beautiful slab of glass and make a sofa table out of
Absolutely,
it, right?
yes. Uh-huh.
And the great thing about, again, that there's so much wood, you can get a lot of legs. This is wood actually from...
The timbers on the back of the piano, there are 7 of them, and on this particular piano, of course, the 5 in the middle are not encumbered by glue or anything like that. The ones on the end have been glued, so they have to be tore apart. But when I rip them down, then that gives me 12 pieces of tapered wood, and I will curve these, I'll refinish them, and these will be the legs to this table. And the customer has determined what height she wants the table, so that'll be the height they are.
And the cool thing about this particular piano is an heirloom. You know, it's a family heirloom, and so there are actually going to be 8 to 10 projects made out of this that different family members can have. So then you've got a keepsake from your beloved loved one, something that's beautiful and that you'll have for years to come. This is my favorite, though. I got to show you up front here. Dad, let's look at this piano top. Now, this would have been where you lift it up to play the keys, right? And so you've actually stabilized this. This is all put together.
Yes, this piece here was below the keyboard.
Okay.
And it's a very heavy piece. It has inset panels. This is the lid to the keyboard. And this piece here would have been longer, but it would have had a hole here where your pedal keys would have come up here and operated the mechanism, you know. So I cut it off. Then I have to cut this off to fit it. And then I have inlaid inside.
Can we lift up
Yes,
the glass?
let's
you
lift
think?
up this piece of
I'll
glass.
hold it up for you. Okay.
I have
show what you've done.
inlaid piano keys in it. Because these are the right height for the glass to sit on. These are, what keys do you call those? The sharp?
The
and
black
flats?
keys.
The black. That's very good, Jessica. And so I've taken the white keys, because they were much taller, and I've ripped all of them down to at least give some dimension to the black keys.
Right.
And then I'll put all of these in here. I'll glue them so they're stable. And then the board behind them to make up the gap is out of the soundboard on the back.
Okay.
And then I'll put the piece of glass on it, put the legs on it, and then we'll have a really neat table. And this table will fit up against the wall. I know where it's going to go. And then it's been suggested, and I can do it, and I will do it. I'll use the 3 pedals that were on the piano, and there'll be a board go down in the back, and each table will have a pedal.
That's so fun. I love that feature.
And then from the pedals, I intend to use some of the wires out of the piano to go up in a diagonal, maybe 3 or 4 on each side.
So here, you know, again, no part goes unused. You've gotten the piano wires out,
Yes.
and you're going to use those to actually string.
Yes.
And then What'll be really interesting, he's going to try to maybe you can actually
push the pedal and get some noise
and get some noise out of the strings, which would be a really neat feature. We'll have to update everybody on that one. But so again, very beautiful wood, ornate parts. These are legs that he'll use for another table.
Yes.
He'll probably implement those into his
and
design.
those are the legs that held the keyboard.
Right,
And so
right.
I'll incorporate that in another project.
Beautiful. Now I want to show this table down here at the bottom. This is actually some former piece. This was a piano that actually came from my home church growing up.
Yes.
And this is a beautiful piece of what kind of wood?
I'm not sure. It's
I mean,
a hardwood, but it is veneered.
It is veneered.
It is veneered.
It's got a beautiful grain to it.
Absolutely.
It almost looks like
yes.
a burl veneer. I'm not sure, but
But
it's a one huge solid piece of wood.
This is the end of the piano.
Okay.
And it's placed on 4 spindles that were just out of an old baluster. I think the skirt board is a piece of bed rail, but it makes a beautiful table.
It really does. And so there are a lot of different uses, a lot of things you can do. But I want to show you, before we lose some time here, or run out of time, I want to show you, this piece is fun. I asked Dad, what are you going to do with this? Give him some ideas for this, and tell him what it is. What part is that, Dad?
Certainly. This was behind the, this was in the back of the piano, and the wires would have run around these. And what I'm planning on doing is cleaning this up, probably making some kind of a little message center on it. These pegs will all be cleaned up. The felts will be taken off. You can use them to hang necklaces on. Or
wouldn't that be a great
whatever
jewelry
you want.
organizer? And maybe even you could put frames in here for pictures, or
Yes,
you could put
absolutely.
corkboard. You could actually hang hooks, hang your barrettes.
Sure, absolutely. Yes.
So this has a lot of potential.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see what
Yeah.
you do with this. Well, Dad, you're always thinking. It's exhausting, really. But I really appreciate all the cool ideas. Don't trash a piano. I see people wanting to dump them or burn them, but don't do that, because there's a lot of beautiful wood and a lot of people out there would be very happy to get their hands on. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. If you have an idea for show and tell, please contact us. We'd love to hear from you.